Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about the teaching of reading. Indeed, all my lectures are about the teaching of reading, but this one is particularly focused upon classrooms, the reading curriculum, and what we know about the teaching of reading and what we know about what we should be doing in conjunction with what we are doing. Let me contextualize reading for you, because I think sometimes people don't recognize how core it is to the curriculum. You know, if you think about schools, you typically, let's say in the US or Canada, kids are in schools 180 days a year. During that time, they're probably getting reading instruction for 90 to around 120 minutes, focused just on reading, and that's not counting the reading they'd be doing in science or other subject areas. I'm talking primarily about the elementary classrooms here. Then if you look at the broader issue of education, the amount of money going into it, in Denmark, 8.5% of the gross national GDP goes into it. In the US, 7%. In Canada, 5.5%. In the US, they spend about $11,000 per child at the elementary level, and $9,000 per year per child in Canada. So reading from an economic perspective, the reality is it's big business. A large portion of the school budget, of a province's budget, of the state budget, of the national budget goes to teachers' salaries, but also goes to the purchase of reading materials. And you have typically departments within government ministries of education developing schemes to, testing schemes to track kids' performance across the years to be sure they're on a positive track, hopefully. Sometimes they're tracking the number of kids who are repeating a grade or advancing a grade, or just looking at school performance in terms of standardized tests. They're also sometimes setting and building curriculum with people that they might bring in to consult, or they might actually hire different people to actually build the curriculum for different regions within the province or across the nation. Indeed, that oftentimes takes place in Canada. We had an arm of the Faculty of Education at UBC that was actually developing curriculum for some of the Northwest Territories. Most often, however, these departments are setting guidelines for selection of curriculum. And by that, the world of publishing and the biggest publishers in the world are all involved in the development of reading materials, have got stacks of materials they're interested in selling to schools. In Canada, for example, you have publishers like Nelson. In the States, you've got Houghton Mifflin, you've got Ginn, Scott Forsman, and others. And the reading program, for example, would include, for each child, a number of books at different levels for the child to read, which would include a range of stories, narratives, and informational texts. And along with those books for the kids, there'd be skill books. And to help the teacher, there'd be a resource book or a teacher's guide. And again, this is not just one book per kid, these are multiple books per kid. Because in a typical grade level, a kid might be expected to actually advance through more than one book. And so a large portion of the school library would be devoted to these collections of books. So what you've got in the name of reading, typically in the teaching of reading, is a graded series of readers. Typically with fairly controlled vocabulary and complexity, and typically in a classroom you might have a range of students of different abilities, so you might actually have a number of books being used by different kids, and in accordance with a range of kids, sometimes the teacher organizing these children into groups. These series include fairly up-to-date and high-quality portions of literature, chapters from books, and informational texts, representing the diversity of the population they're meant to serve. And by the diversity, it would be ethnic diversity, but also representation of people with disabilities and so on. So you've got a series of reading material for the kids to read, what I might consider to be a diet of reading material, with the expectation that the children who are reading a particular book can read it comfortably but somewhat challenged, so that indeed they're actually hopefully increasing their reading ability as they move through the book. And in conjunction with the reading of the selection, there are usually various activity materials, often to focus upon related skills, tied to the provinces or the states or the nationals' articulation of a scope and sequence of skills. And that scope and sequence of skills would include an articulation of the word recognition skills, including phonics, an articulation of the comprehension skills and strategies. It might also include some study skills and skills related to reading in different subject areas like mathematics and science. And then it could include a slew of other skills, depending upon the series, that might include literary understandings, could include an attempt to integrate writing into the program, and particularly writing related to reading. It might also include, increasingly these days, some skills related to students' ability to work together, skills related to collaboration. And another development, which I think we started to see around the 1990s, skills around the student's ability to assess himself or herself. Sometimes done in conjunction with having students do sort of checklist following activities, but also involving portfolios. So you have this typical organisation, and related to these material, you might have different emphases. Sometimes it's just a straightforward sort of a collection of stories and informational texts, but oftentimes the reading series has organises the material around themes, where there might be across the selection several related to a particular area, which might be something, this wild country, or some other theme that people think might be relevant to the curriculum, or indeed a theme that was suggested by the State Department. Some of the material is also, the readers are set up not just as a reading series, but what would be called an integrated language arts series. And sometimes you will see a sort of a combination of these possibilities. Some will also claim that they emphasize very much explicit teaching or direct instruction, and they would try to distinguish themselves from other programs where the kids might be engaged more in the reading and activities rather than sort of as much direct skill instruction. Another emphasis in a lot of programs these days is what might be called a project orientation, which could be connected with a theme orientation, but one which actually connects kids to specific projects, where the material isn't preset so much, but teachers gather materials related to the projects they might initiate. Historically, for example, the Montessori schools have proceeded in a sort of a very much a project fashion. Another program out of Italy, which has an incredible history of projects, is the Reggio Emilia preschool concepts, which people have carried forward into the primary grades. And finally, there's another type of series, and there are probably other ones that sort of emphasize subject areas. One of my favorite programs is a program called The Seeds of Science, The Roots of Reading, which uses science material as a vehicle for teaching kids their reading skills. Well, this, as I've described it, gives you a sort of a general sense of the diet of experiences that kids will engage with. What I'd like to do next is to take a much closer look within these materials to actually look at how the teaching and engagement of the students across these stories is set up so that they can really begin to explore in more depth what it means to actually teach a child to read and what's the thinking behind the construction of these materials. What I'm describing here isn't a minute part of schooling. If you go back to my earlier comment, it pertains to, as I've said, sometimes 2 hours of each child's day every day. And so, as you will see as I expand this, you'll sort of see potentially how this sort of plays out. And we'll return to that question of how effective is it in terms of helping kids learn to read as we proceed.